Hi, everybody. So I'll just go ahead and begin. I only have a couple remarks. I'm Blue Cease. I'm the director of the Rochester Contemporary Art Center. Welcome to tonight's program, Meet the Storytellers Behind the Warp and Weft. And I think we'll probably have a few more people join us as we're warming up here. We had about 50 people registered for tonight's discussion, so we're really excited by that. I have two brief bits of housekeeping. First of all, those of you who are in Rochester, I want to invite you all to attend an artist talk we're having here for our other current exhibition by Yaqub Shabazz. And the artist talk is in association with his exhibition called On the Shoulders of Giants. That will take place on May 6th here at 6:30 at Rochester Contemporary Art Center. And also a little bit of housekeeping and orientation for tonight's talk. We will encourage everyone to save their questions for after. We have some time set aside, but please put them into the chat so that Mara and if necessary, I can moderate from those and select some, but we definitely are planning for a discussion after each of the storytellers speak tonight. So as many of you know, Rocco worked with Mara to launch this archive online about a year ago. And then a few weeks ago, on April 1st, a year later, we launched with a terrific opening reception, the installation Warp and Weft Face to Face. And we had wonderful attendance. And it was absolutely terrific to see the exhibition and all of your stories functioning as this like social catalyst, prompting conversations and encouraging people to, reconnect and learn about someone else's story or learn about a third person story. So for us, it's been really wonderful to live with the exhibition now for a few weeks after a terrific opening reception. And I want to thank Mara again. Mara, thank you so many times for working with us. First of all, of course, for organizing this, but for working with us and trusting us at ROCO to organize this physical exhibition of the archive. And I want to thank and recognize Brent Joseph for his graphic design and type design work. He handled all of your stories, putting them into physical form in the gallery. And of course, Rajesh Barnabas for his terrific video design work, which is the central motion animated piece of the exhibition in the physical gallery. And lastly, I want to recognize and thank my colleagues here, Alyssa and Jess, who are both on the call today. And we have a few other team members who are not with us tonight, but also put in a lot of time to make the exhibition a reality. As with everything we do here, it takes many hands. But we're proud of the exhibition. We're happy it's open for a couple more weeks. And those of you who have not yet seen the exhibition, please come down and visit us. We're open to the public Wednesday through Sunday, 12 to 5, and then Friday nights, we're open until 9 o'clock. I wanna now welcome Mara to take the mic, the curator of the Warp and Weft archive. Mara.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Mara Ahmed. I am an artist and filmmaker based on Paumanok, the actual native name for what we call Long Island. I'd like to give a brief intro to the Warp and Weft before inviting our storytellers to speak. We actually moved to Paumanok from Rochester in 2020 at the peak of the pandemic. As we were all getting used to social distancing, I struggled with isolation within isolation, disruption within a broader context of displacement. I wanted to weave my experience into other narrative threads, connect with friends and family, and explore our thoughts and emotions together as a community. I began to imagine an archive of stories. I knew that the stories of women and people of color have been disappeared from history books and archives. Why not center their voices at this time of crisis? I knew that English as an imperial language has wreaked havoc on native tongues across the globe. Why not build a multilingual archive? But what about the Western expectation of legibility? I went back to Edouard Glissant's work and the right to opacity. It recognizes that difference does not mean understanding otherness by making it transparent. In fact, illegibility should not put us off. It should inspire us to connect and learn more. With my dislocation within a quarantine, I was sharply aware of other people's desolations within desolations. I thought of Gaza, which has been under blockade for 15 years, and Kashmir, the most militarized and surveilled region of the world. Incredibly, most gratefully, we were able to hear those stories. Now, a year since the release of the archive, we have the tremendous privilege of visiting the Warp and Weft face-to-face, an exhibition at the Rochester Contemporary Art Center. Please go and see it. We also have this wonderful opportunity to connect with some of our amazing storytellers worldwide. Thank you everyone for being here. And without any more delays, let me invite Ashwaq Abualoof from Gaza to tell us more about her story. Ashwaq wrote Harsher Than War, and she is joining us from Palestine in the middle of the night. Ashwaq, I know that Israeli warplanes have been bombing Gaza. I cannot believe that I have to say that to you while I'm introducing you, but I hope that your family and your friends are all doing okay.
Thank you for you, Mara. Thank you for all the presents. Thank goodness we are doing well, and I'm fine as usual. And my story as a mirror to the current case we live. First of all, I'm so happy with the honor of your company and so grateful for that opportunity which is international, to convey my message from Gaza, from overseas, from Palestine and everywhere. First of all, and from the very beginning, once you read the title, Harsher Than War, you will wonder what the harsher than war could be. No one can imagine things worse than war, but actually there are many. Through the pandemic, I was feeling overwhelmed and stuck and I'm sorry. I feel overwhelmed and stuck with a feeling to do nothing through the pandemic. Nevertheless, the pandemic deepened my idea and deepened my understanding of the current event at that time, that if the pandemic is a mayhem or is a gift. To simplify the idea behind my story, here in Gaza, we are like birds. We are like birds with an enormous wings, living in a tiny cage. Those enormous waves symbolize our dreams, desire, our hope to live like other people in the outer world, which means outer space in Gaza. To live in a safe life with the simplest right, where we can live, grow, move, and educate, or even drink fresh water or wash with a sweet water, not salty. Trust me, I never exaggerated when I draw comparison between where we have been living for ages along with the blockage and the pandemic, the outbreak of pandemic, and ended up with the idea that the pandemic is harsher than war. Being tested positive for COVID means you have inner war, means you have inner violent tornado blowing you with a deadly symptoms physically and psychologically. Under where I can struggle, resist, love, I can give hand, and even I can get married. While under the pandemic with the COVID-19, I was vacant and barren, sinking in depression and pain. By the way, I positive corona for twice. After I had experienced and passed the madness of corona, I put my self-growth at the top of my priority. Passing that squeezed unconsciously is the big loss, in my opinion. So when I considered carefully that squeezed, I found that what we had got was a gift from God, was a gift from God to redeem each one of us. So I decided to live my life daily, openly and honestly, where I can reveal my weaknesses and test and enjoy my strength. Never ever can test this blessing without replacing my negative thoughts with more positive ones and deconstruct any harmful idea about myself. So I decided to admit my faults. I decided to start blaming myself and to stop critical myself and to stop critic myself. So I'm so sorry. So I want to make a mistake because I'm not perfect and because this is the way where I can live and I can learn. And every day, every new day I have is an apology to my humanity. The most important thing is to live without regrets. Nowadays, I follow the beat of my dream. I follow the beat of my own drum, even if it is out of tune. The pandemic at first hurt me a lot, but late helped me a lot. Helped me how to rise from the ashes with an optimistic idea that every mayhem, every pandemic is a new chance where I can accomplish and when I can accomplish and fail, when I can experience and renew and rejuvenate myself, when I can die, where I can live and die, where I can return from dead with a new redemption to move on and keep on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashwaq. Thank you so much. And thank you for staying up. I know it's Ramadan, and to do this with us in the middle of the night, I'm so grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And also, Ashwaq, if you're tired and if you need to go, you can leave,
No,
whenever
I'm fine. I'm fine. And I will stay at the last minute with you. It's Ramadan, and fortunately, tomorrow is a Friday, our weekend.
Yes. Okay, so Ashwaq, just looking for my notes. So next up, we have Kaddijatou Fatty from the Gambia, and she wrote a piece called Pay It Forward. Kadija, if you would like to tell us a little bit more about your story.
Thank you very much, Mara, for this invitation. It means a lot to me. I hope you all can hear me. Thumbs up. Yes. Once again, my name is Kaddijatou Fatty. I'm fondly called Dija. I am a performing artist and also a teacher. Pay It Forward is really a piece that has really inspired me. And the reason why I shared it with Mara was because it has really changed my life tremendously. I did not go to university, but I had the opportunity to be among few young people in the Gambia to study performing art through a non-governmental organization and the only professional theater in the Gambia called the Abundant Theater Performing Arts Center. So after I finished that training at the theater, learning a lot in all genres of performing art, I felt it necessary to share my skill and my talent to the younger generation. in 2016, when I started working at a school as a teacher librarian, I realized that there are lots of young people in my community who couldn't read and write, who couldn't even express themselves. I knew in my heart of heart, I may not be the best teacher to them because of my academics, but also I felt there's a need for me to share the little knowledge and skill I have that I gathered from the theater. So I decided to initiate and found an organization called the Kaddijatou Center of Excellence, which is a performing art and literacy education program for vulnerable, marginalized children in my community and in the Gambia at large. And this program every Saturday has really impacted. And this program every Saturday has really impacted the lives of so many children in my community and the Gambia at large. I'm able to teach them reading, writing, acting, poetry, singing, all of it. And with the help of friends and colleagues, I was able to bring people from different walks of lives to also share their knowledge with these kids, which has been really impactful and amazing. But the COVID-19 pandemic has really affected me a lot, and most especially these young people I was helping. When the COVID hit, I couldn't hold on-site sessions because I didn't have the funding and the resources to gather over 30 to 40 kids in one confinement to share my knowledge or teach them what I have. And these kids are from, very vulnerable and marginalized backgrounds who cannot afford a computer or even a laptop, personal laptop. So it was very frustrating for me to not being able to help these kids because most of the kids were not going to school and they couldn't have anyone to help them. And I remembered one time, one of my students, who is Aisha, called me and, she was like, Miss Kadija, it's so unfortunate that I'm finding it difficult to learn. My parents are not able to help me and I cannot also attend your session. That really broke my heart. It broke my heart and it's still breaking my heart because I felt I was ready to help these young children and I couldn't do it at my disposal because I didn't have the resources. So the pandemic has really affected me and my dreams to impact lives, to change lives, and to, educate, enlighten, and sensitize these kids, truly.
Thank you for sharing that, Kadija. It just struck me that I should have asked you to do that, to share information about if you have a website, if you want to share it in the chat so people can learn more about the work that you're doing and maybe support it if they can.
Yeah, so the organization is called Kaddijatou Center of Excellence. I will write it for you all. We're on Instagram, Twitter, and also Facebook. You can follow us or support in any way possible you can.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kadija.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Zoe Lawler, who is joining us from Ireland. Zoe wrote This River.
Hi everyone. My name is Zoe. I'm a teacher. I'm from Limerick in Ireland. And thank you so much to Mara for inviting me along to speak at this tonight and to be part of this amazing event, and also to Rocco for all the work they've done putting it on. So when Mara asked me to participate in this brilliant archive and to do a story reflecting on my experience of 2020 and the zeitgeist around that, I said yes, because of course I was honored to be asked. but mainly because I think it's impossible to say no to Mara, as I found, even when I really wanted to. We've only met a couple of times, but we're good friends, and I really respect her and her work, and I care about her a lot. So I couldn't say no, and I agreed, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to write or how to relate my experience of a year where kind of nothing happened, you know, and everything happened at the same time. It felt very I felt a bit under pressure. So my piece is called This River, and I just wrote it really about living in lockdown in Ireland. Our lockdown was extremely restrictive, and like we were limited to 2 kilometers radius and then 5 kilometers, and then we all went crazy when we got a 10 kilometer radius we could move in. So everything was closed. We could barely meet anybody. Everything happened outside, which in Ireland is not a good thing because the weather is so bad usually. So it was like living in a kind of a bizarre ghost town all of the time. So I felt a bit of a fraud when I was trying to do this, and under pressure then in this great company to not produce something that was complete rubbish, which you can adjudicate yourselves. So one day in winter, I was like, it was getting closer to the deadline, and I went for a walk along the river that I wrote about. The River Shannon, it flows through my city and through most of the country in Ireland. And it was a really typical Irish winter day, grey, dull, freezing cold, wet and windy. And I was just walking along the river, and it was the only activity we could do at the time. So I walked for hours every day. So I just kind of started writing this kind of notion of what the river meant to me, and the connectedness and disconnectedness of the pandemic in my head. And then I typed a few words into my phone to keep my train of thought, and came home and put it down on paper. And I guess that's my process. It's not a process. It's usually how I work, kind of panic, paralysis, and then fear of a deadline that makes me finally do something. So I'm pretty active on Palestine with the Ireland-Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Gaza Action Ireland. And great to hear from a friend in Gaza, sending all love to you there, and other social justice issues. So like most people, the pandemic was a real disconnect from that work and all the people around it. But we did go on the streets when George Floyd was murdered, and we did kind of do our little individual acts for Palestine, even though we couldn't get together. So I wanted to write something that honored those moments and that coming together and that solidarity that we sent from a small city in the Midwest of Ireland to our Black Lives Matter friends fighting racial injustice in the US, and that the solidarity that we always hold for Palestine. So I just wanted to try and convey that and connect it to the river. So I guess, like the pandemic, it's a story of nothing and everything kind of at the same time, which was 2020 for me. And now when I think back on it, it's just so surreal. Like, were we really restricted to, you know, a 2 kilometer radius and having a story in your head in case you were stopped by the police, which I was while walking on my own. Had I gone outside my radius, we couldn't meet anyone or buy anything. So, you know, what did we learn? That maybe our governments, we confirmed that our governments hate us and will never do anything to take care of us. And we confirmed that our connectedness and our collectiveness and all the hope that we hold in that is so important. And I think that was the part that was so missed so much. So now when I walk along the river, which I did today, but only like, I don't have to do it every day and I don't have to do it for hours. I think I cherish it more because it was my salvation during that isolation and that restriction. And I'm happy to be there, but I'm really happy that it's not the only place that I can be, which it was for a long time. So I think that's my reflection on my reflection. And thank you very much for asking me.
What was that?
That was not me. That's my party piece at the end where I just throw a little music out.
Thank you so much, Zoe. I know it's very late in Ireland as well, and in the Gambia and in Gaza. So I particularly want to thank all three of you for being here today. And Zoe, particularly for your very dynamic, beautiful piece that I love. So thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Karen Faris. And Karen created an art object as a response to the entire archive. It's called the warp and weft of it all. We will be sharing pictures of her artwork with you as she's speaking. So, Karen.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Mara, for inviting me to participate in this. Hearing your stories is just wonderful. Like I said, my name is Karen Ferris, and I'm an interdisciplinary artist in Rochester, New York, who focuses on conceptual projects rather than specific mediums of art, which means 1 minute I'm using fabric, the next collage, maybe performance art, who knows. And for this project, my participation was a response to the stories of the archive. I'm going to start with giving you a few words about my experience with the pandemic, and then talk about the artistic response to the archive as an entity in and of itself. I have to say, I'm like going to be like the comedy, like levity moment here, because for me, the pandemic wasn't all that bad. I don't mind isolation, and not having to be a social butterfly was actually a relief to me, and my family remained healthy. With normal activities shut down, it was a time for me of prolific work. I wrote a play about capitalism, Western femininity, and climate change called Surface Tension. I talked about the pandemic through collage and poems. And I wrote a totally stupid but fun tale called Memoirs of an Unbeaten Egg, where little Missy Eggster has to hit the road to rescue Humpty, who's been kidnapped by Farmer Brown and sold to a 24-hour diner. But behind all that focused work was a very fuzzy brain because of the things that couldn't be controlled. I missed my family in Canada, and I was terrified that the border might not ever open again. We take our freedom of movement for granted until it's gone. Suddenly, the river between the two countries, the St. Lawrence, was an enormous impasse that nothing could bridge. Which brings me to the archive and borders and stories and what separates us and what brings us together. As I read the archive, I was struck by how raw and powerful the stories were, as we've heard today, how vulnerable the people had let themselves be in their stories. There was also a sense of depth and breadth of the contents of the archive itself. And this felt like a very important element to respond to. And so I decided to use the metaphor of warp and weft and literally weave their stories together. I took a sentence from each of their stories, created fabric out of it, and then wove it onto a pin loom. The stories not only became intertwined, but formed one piece, a single tapestry. Also, as a footnote, textiles go hand in hand with civilization and can be used as a way to read history. And this felt particularly apt for this moment for the archive. And the process of weaving meant that some parts of the story were raised to the top while others were submerged and hidden. Languages and language stopped and started. They were both separate and together, which is what weaving does, right? It takes individual threads, makes them connect and interact with each other, and ultimately be part of a single piece, solidarity. Why is this important? Because this is the point in human history where we must decide to come together, to work on behalf of each other, no matter the borders we use as individual reference points. We all deserve so much more than what is happening across the world. How do we stop the divisions being created between us? By listening to each other, really listening and opening our hearts to the lives and experiences of others. At the end of the day, we are all only human. Thank you, Mara, for your work, and thank you to the storytellers for all your stories you shared. You all touched me deeply.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much. And thank you for that beautiful art object that I wish that was a part of the Warp and Weft face-to-face as well, because I think it's so important. All the responses from the artists are so important. Our next storyteller is Erica Bryant, and her story is called Celebrate With Me. Erica will be talking about one of her collages, so we will share a picture of it with you. Erica.
Thank you. Thank you so much for including me in this wonderful tapestry, and thanks to all the storytellers who've gone before. It's really wonderful to hear you talk about your works. My name is Erica Bryant, and I wrote my story about the collage that you can see there. So I have one photograph of my great-grandfather. His name was Roscoe Foster. And in the photograph, he's sitting in a rocking chair on the porch of his home in Mississippi. And the family says that he would sit on that porch when the Ku Klux Klan was said to be out and about, and he had a shotgun, and he would sit on the porch with a shotgun with the intention of trying to protect his family. And I decorate family photos, or I use family photos in collages, which is a technique that I stole from Mara, actually. It was inspired by all the artwork that she's made with her family photos. And I never really could get the collage right of my great-grandfather. And I never did until the pandemic came. And the pandemic coincided with George Floyd's murder. And it was a period during which it was very difficult for the Black community, because we were dying at higher rates from coronavirus, and also seeing yet another example of the idea that our lives matter less in the United States. And so my cousin, I saw a picture of him, and this is a picture of the gentleman in the picture next to my great-grandfather is my cousin Joe. And he was this was taken at a protest of the George Floyd murder in Chicago. And when I saw that picture, I put him next to my great-grandfather, and I was like, okay, this is it. And it was a sad moment to me, because I felt like there was just so much that had not changed in 4 generations. And in more than 4 generations, because he was like a couple of generations out of slavery. And then now there was the repetitiveness of, like, I remember when my parents had to explain to me why everyone was so upset about Rodney King. And it wasn't just about Rodney King, it was about so much more. And I had to explain to my son why this was not just about George Floyd, it was about so much more. And I was like, this is just never going to end. And so I was working on the collage, and it's at a certain point, the sort of sadness shifted over into a pride in the fact that we were still fighting. And that, and it made me think of the Lucille Clifton poem, which I highly recommend you look up if you haven't heard it. It's called "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" And part of it I'll just say the ending of it. And it says, won't you celebrate with me? Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. And to me, this image says that the United States has tried to kill our spirit for hundreds of years, for generations. And 4 generations after my great-grandfather had to sit on that porch trying to defend his family against white supremacists, my cousin had to face the tear gas and the rubber bullets, just trying to express the simple sentiment that Black Lives Matter. And we're still fighting, but we're still fighting. And so that sentiment sort of stuck with me. And it's like, yes, like my great grandfather had to fight, my cousin had to fight, and my son will have to fight, and probably his son will have to fight. And I have to accept that. And I just have to say that, you know, celebrate with me that we're still here and our lives still matter, and we're going to keep, we'll always hold on to that no matter what. And our humanity is sacred. And we will stand up for the fallen, like George Floyd and all the people that this type of things happened to that didn't become famous. And it's just sort of like a celebration of our spirit. And so that was what the piece was called, Celebrate With Me. And I'm really grateful to have been invited to participate in this, because it made me think about it in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise if I had just been making the collage. So I appreciate the time to talk about it.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you for your very powerful story and for your beautiful collage as well. Our next speaker is Quajay Donnell, and he wrote another very powerful piece called Black Futures Matter.
Thank you, Mark, and hello to everyone. I'm enjoying a little bit of sun today on a irregular Rochester day, and I wrote Black Futures Matter. And in 2020, I was, a father homeschooling an autistic child with my wife, and we were really hyper focused on him, and also focused on my two older children out in the world, and navigating those early months of the pandemic. And, I felt overwhelmed, but I tried to remain positive while making sure my family was okay and felt loved, while taking photos of public art and trying to be, just kind of a positive force in the world. And similar to what Erica was just speaking about, then George Floyd happened. And I became angry, I was frustrated, I was sad that even during the pandemic, Black lives were still in danger, especially at the hands of the police. And hearing I can't breathe while dealing with an illness that impacted our ability to breathe, just hit me in a way that is really hard to describe. And I remember my mother sending me a dash cam days after George Floyd, later sharing that when she heard George call out for his mother, it really broke her heart, and she thought of her two adult sons. She was nervous as a parent for our well-being, and as an adult, living over 300 miles away, it was something that was on her mind. And I was also nervous for my own children. And so when I wrote Black Futures Matter, it was with my youngest son in mind, my autistic child, who was 10 at the time. And I was thinking of the similarities in his life and that of Tamir Rice in age, and Elijah McClain and how he saw the world. And hearing Elijah say, "I'm just different," broke my heart, because my now 13-year-old is very different and sees the world very differently. And I constantly think to myself, how can I protect my children in this world? And I really don't have the answers. I don't know how to do that, because there are so many things that are really out of our control. But when I wrote this very personal piece, it allowed me to spark some conversations. It was therapeutic in a way. And it really allowed me to just kind of put some thoughts out there. And one of the thoughts about, being, remembering as a child myself, the conversation around how to interact with the police or interact with people of power, and how I remember that conversation more than I remember the conversation about the birds and the bees. And it was a conversation that, I rehash time and time again if I am pulled over, or if my children are with me and I have had the same conversation with them. And so it's just very, in 2020, we're dealing with so many different things. And, you would hope that, maybe there was one less thing to think about, but really they're still at the forefront were, Black lives, and, did Black lives matter to the extent that they should. So thank you, Mara, for allowing me to share. And thank you to all that have read and commented. And thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Quajay, for writing such a beautiful, personal, and compelling, powerful piece. Thank you. Now I'd like to invite Deema K. Shehabi from Oakland, California, to talk about her poem, At Cathedral Grove, a treatise on vanishing. Deema.
Thank you so much, Mara. It's such a delight and honor to be with all of you. And I'm immensely moved by these stories, and I feel like I resonate with them on so many levels. My name is, again, greetings everyone. My name is Deema K. Shehabi. I'm a Palestinian poet residing in Northern California. I'm perpetually grateful to Mara Ahmed for her immaculate curation of our voices and our art, and for asking the right questions of us in 2020. A time that was really rife with quietude, association, and intuitive imagination. And although it was officially a time of physical isolation for all of us, for me, that very quietude paradoxically engendered deep connections within myself, my family, and other orbiting people and friends. Friendships lost to time, especially in distance, were regained and nurtured during that time, strangely. Again, these paradoxes that exist. Time sharpened, it expanded, it slowed down, it sped up. And sometimes it came to a screeching halt in the pandemic. So I felt like time really, really sharpened. And certain moments in 2020 remain particularly sharp to this day. One such moment appears to me as though it happened yesterday, and it is told in my poetic reflection for the Warp Weft. And it happened during a family visit to Cathedral Grove, which is located in John Muir Woods in Northern California by Marin County. The majesty of the place, the tall 2,000-year-old redwood trees that were shooting up into the cobalt sky, impressed upon me a feeling of my own mortality, and especially of the temporality of our existence on this planet. I watched my children carelessly skipping ahead in that place, unaware or seemingly deeply aware of where we were in that Anthropocene phase. I thought of the tribes that for centuries before John Muir arrived were the caretakers of that beautiful land, of that immense kaleidoscopic grove I was walking under. I immediately thought of my own childhood, and memories of my parents rushed back. In a poignant moment, a moment encapsulated in the poetic reflection, I asked myself to ponder the meaning of the root of the root of the root of my being, which is a haunting and reverberating question in the opening line of Rumi's Masnavi. With the idea of roots, I immediately thought of my mother and her identity as a Palestinian woman and as a deeply spiritual person. And I remember her reading Ayatul Kursi to my voyaging father. I also thought of our losses as Palestinians and my first memory of massacre and erasure during the Sabra and Shatila massacres when I was only 12, but the images are forever indelible in my mind. Those memories converged in my head, and I was struck by how time is measured for both humans and trees. In the reflection, someone said to me, there's no sense in counting the hours, but time is measured in bark, cambium layer, sapwood, and heartwood. This reflection also led me to an epiphany, namely that the resurrection of justice for Palestine and Palestinians is inextricably tied to the well-being of the earth. An exigent feeling that gave me hope and comfort despite where we think we were heading. A year later, with the isolation over, I find myself craving the quietude once again, and often bemoaning how we humans never learn from our mistakes. I was hoping, as the brilliant Arundhati Roy said, that the pandemic would act as a portal, illuminating our wrongs and showing us the path forward. And I think our consciousness has evolved and intuitively sees the light, though our mistakes repeat. And I just like to end with an excerpt from the story, which is a reflection upon light. Afternoon dialects beneath a redwood canopy, two children skip ahead. Their feet grind the ground, crushing ferns, tearing tender skulls of leaves. They giggle while a vanishing world lies ahead of them. The spot where the sun abandons is where the light hangs briefly beneath a shoulder blade and spreads. Thank you so much. I so appreciate being here. Thank you, Mara, for everything, and for the fellow storytellers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Deema, for your beautiful, profound poem and all the work that you do. Thank you. Next, we have Selena Fleming, and she also wrote a poem, and the title of her poem is For Every Goliath Meets Its David. Selena.
Thank you so much, Mara, for really just inviting me in to write and share some of my work. I've been a fan of yours for a long time. But my piece, you know, as all of my pieces, well, first, my name is Selena Fleming Cochran. I am a storyteller, which I get from my father's mother, and which she got from her mother and her mother before her. And I found that out when I went to Barbados a few years before the pandemic. And so there was this lineage of telling a story because none of my siblings wrote or were poetic or any of those things. And so it led me to that discovery, which during the pandemic came to a height when I found myself just boiling under the weight of what was going on across the globe. In our communities with violence against unarmed Black men and women. Tamir Rice left a hole in me because of, as a parent of 2 young children, having to explain how a 12-year-old playing in a playground gets gunned down for literally doing what children do, which is play, was terrible. And I just, story after story, heartbreak after heartbreak, I just felt like I was boiling. And the piece began as a personal entry in my journal because I said, I can't breathe. And then I said, you know, what is it that I'm feeling? And I said, I just feel like I'm boiling alive. That's how I felt. And as I was just writing out all of these emotions that I was feeling, I could hear my father's mother's voice in my head saying, you are, you can, and you will get through this. And I thought, ooh, I am, I can, and I will. And so I began to write about how I felt this pain and how I felt like everything in me was on fire. And at the same time, call in my grandmother, call in my father who had recently passed, call in all of these people who had done it before me. I have a great aunt who's 96 years old, and she broke so many barriers. And I began to think about them. And I thought, you know what, I am gonna make it. And you know why? Because every Goliath meets its David. Every Goliath gets knocked on its butt. I had to censor myself there, but you understood what I was saying. Every obstacle can be overcome. It will take time. Sometimes you cry, sometimes there's blood, there's sweat, there's tears, and you take a step back and you take a breath and you take a knee. But when you're ready, you get your sword out. You lock arms with the people next to you and around you, and you continue to press and you continue to fight. And that was what this piece was all about. It was about encouraging us to not gloss over the pain, to not gloss over the ache, to not gloss over the things that make us human, that hurt us, and to also encourage us to understand that we can transcend that. We can move with it without it crippling us or maiming us or marring us to the point of paralysis. And so that really was the object of the piece, was to say, listen, we can reclaim our time. We are warriors. We are goddesses. We can, we will, we must. We have children. We have generations coming behind us. And I just think about, you know, what my parents went through as being immigrants. And then I know, okay, yeah, there's still work to be done, and we're going to do it. We must do it because there's no other option. Failure is not an option. And so the pandemic was that time. It was like that spark that said, yeah, we're going to keep pressing. We're not going to be invisible. We're not going to disappear. We're not going to cower. we are going to rise. We're going to stand in the fullness of our dignity, in the fullness of our strength, in the fullness of our ancestors who've done this work before us. And we're going to just do the work, and we're going to make sure it gets done. So that was the inspiration behind my piece. As a storyteller, I always want to encourage everyone to, see the pain and also see the beauty, because they can coexist side by side. And a lot of change came out of the pandemic. And while it was tough, I believe it allowed me to shift in a way that I always thought I could do later on in life. It shifted me. It was like an accelerant that pulled me forward to say, yeah, no, it's no more time for hiding and cowering and, living this kind of, can I be human, is over. So that was my piece. And thank you so much again for inviting me to share a little bit about why I wrote the piece, and hopefully the words resonate.
Thank you, Selena. Thank you so much. I have to say that when I was editing your audio, the words, the rhythm of the words, and they were so inspiring and so organic that I couldn't help repeating all the words with you as I was editing. Very powerful piece. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next storyteller is Darien Lehmann, and his piece is called A Cover Story. Darien.
Hi, everyone. It's really wonderful to see you all and to hear you all and to kind of see what some of these threads running between our pieces are. So thanks, Mara, for the occasion. And I was grateful when Mara invited me to contribute a piece to this project because although I consider myself a writer, I don't get an opportunity to write pieces like this. And so for me, it was a chance to kind of make sense of a curious fact in our family history that I had been thinking about for many years, and kind of obliquely come at what I experienced in 2020 as a complete unraveling of many of the assumptions, of many of the stories, really, that my family has told me about where we came from, an unraveling of the stories I tell myself about who I am, and also, an unraveling collectively of how we understand history as kind of proceeding and progressing. And so this was an occasion to kind of grapple with some of those things. And as I said, it began with the kind of untold story of my great-grandmother, Lucy, who I knew fairly well. She lived, I think I was 8 or 9 when she passed away. And we didn't realize that my last name, the last name that I carry, was given to her by a man who, by all accounts, she never met. And so, over the years, my family is very interested in family history. I got a hold of these letters that were sent to my great-grandmother from a man on an oil field in North Dakota who was looking for a wife. And, just kind of reading through these amazing glimpses into what 1920 was like for single, unattached people, having a little romance by mail correspondence. It's really interesting, but, I kept looking there and thinking, well, I don't think she ever actually met this man. I think she kind of, I think she bailed out, essentially. And so, I kind of wanted to understand, in a former life, I was an academic with a training in ethnography and anthropology. And so I wanted to approach her story with a kind of ethnographer's eye to the cultural context of 1920 in rural upstate New York, in which she is an unmarried woman with eventually 3 children. My grandfather spent the first months of his life in Albion prison with her when she was arrested. We don't know all the details of that, but these were things that I gradually learned as I was kind of looking into some of these letters in the context. And so to be able to think about what it was like for her to live through what she lived through, and to think about how so many of my ancestors only appear in the written records, in the archives, the official archives, when it's in the crime blotters of the day, petty crimes, crimes of impropriety and of poverty. And so, against that backdrop, thinking about that story, I was thinking about my own story and the kind of unraveling of what for me is a kind of bourgeois myth of each generation does better than the one before it, until finally everyone's in the middle class and we're all professionals, right, and gainfully employed. This narrative really came undone for me and has in the last decade. And I've really kind of struggled my own sense of professional and personal identity. And so in the wake of this kind of revelation, I was thinking about my great-grandmother and thinking about these narratives that I inherited, that, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. And I thought, I don't want to stand on their shoulders. I want to imagine that if I were alive in their time, or if they were alive in this time, that we'd stand shoulder to shoulder, and that we would stand in solidarity, and to kind of think of the ancestors in this way as contemporaries in a sense in struggle was kind of an interesting thought experiment. And just to kind of bring this finally to a conclusion around the question of how do we think about history as the story we tell about where we're at as a society. This progressive idea that it's going to get better, each generation does a little better, contrasting with this idea, in academia, some people talk about Afro-pessimism as this kind of idea that there's white supremacy, it's always there, we're always struggling against it. And I think we could talk about capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy more generally as kind of this thing that it appears as though it's this unmovable monolith and every generation has to fight the same battles, but I think that's not quite correct. And so what thinking about my great-grandmother's story and the present moment kind of helped me to imagine is a history in which there's only the present, and we are inside of a historical moment that opens onto futures we don't know, and that each historical moment has its own texture and intensity. And so the thing is to just be inside that moment, struggling to right the injustices that we see all around us. And so, I just want to close by sharing a quote from Robin Kelley, which I think kind of sums that up, which is that liberation is not guaranteed, only the struggle is. And so, I kind of used that moment, the end of 2020, all hell breaking loose politically as well in the United States in that moment with the elections, to kind of say, this is how I want to be in time, in history with others, is in the historical moment that we are in, fighting for one another and with one another. So thanks, Mara, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Darien. Thank you for a very honest, personal, and elegant story. The way that you've written it is just absolutely beautiful. Thank you. Next up, we have Rose Pascarello Beauchamp, and she wrote a piece called A Life in Theater. Rose.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mara. I'm an interdisciplinary movement artist based on Seneca land, which is also Rochester, New York right now. And I'm interested in looking at the integration of dance and embodied justice. And right now I'm working on centering the body and reconnecting the body to invisible histories. So I'm a storyteller, but I'm not a writer, ish, right? And so I was so thankful, Mara, when you asked me to write. I write, but it's personal. And so this was actually one of the first non-academic article that I was able to share. And so I really appreciate that. And it was scary for me. So was 2020. 2020, I mean, it feels important to say that I'm grateful, and I recognize the privilege that I had during the beginning part of the pandemic. Like many of you, it was a complete closure of my entire life. As an artist and a movement artist and a dancer, what I do is in the body with other people, and like that was just gone right away. And I think that due to my dance and movement history, I was very hyper aware of the trauma that we were all feeling in our body. I mean, I can say the trauma of just a pandemic and this closure in my own body, but I started to think about the collective trauma. And there are many collective traumas throughout history that live in our bodies. And it was interesting to kind of be placed in the middle of one. I also feel like it gave me the opportunity to slow down, which ironically is what I teach. I teach meditation and yoga and all of these things, but I am never slow. I'm always going, and I'm always in rehearsal, and I'm always doing. And so I do think that this idea of slowing down became a physical reality for me. I was able to connect with family and connect with the ideas that I'm constantly exploring. I realized the only thing I could control was my own body. And I can't even do that really, but I could at least be mindful with it. I couldn't control my family. I couldn't control what was happening. You know, loss of control was kind of ever present. And also there was this overwhelming beauty of the disruption, like to do things I would never do, to start to investigate other ways of being. So my story ended up being a reflective piece, looking at the impact that theater had in my life. Many of my significant moments in my life took place in a theater, and I like the actual building of a theater, and also in the theater and dance as a practice. But I started, when I wasn't able to go into a theater, I started to reflect on like, what are these things? How do I exist? Who am I? And who are we as artists at this time when everything is different? And so the story kind of documented these moments of my life. And the process of writing it was tricky. You know, there was so, as you've all articulated beautifully, there was so much going on. I had like 5 stories to write, right? I was thinking about embodied abolitionism in my white body as all of this upheaval is going on in the United States. You know, the Daniel Prude Black Lives Matter protests going on here, that felt really ever present. I was thinking about this collective body and trauma in the pandemic, but what ended up coming out was about me. And that feels really important because that's what this moment was. And at the same time, I was struggling with that. And Mara was so wonderful. She just encouraged me to keep going and to keep kind of following those threads. What I realize now is that this story was a part of my grieving process, grieving for all that occurred in 2020. So these uprisings, the trauma, the loss of daily norm, the loss of life, the continued fight that goes on for social justice. And the way that I process everything is in my art, in the theater. And so the story was another way to do it. But it left me with questions, and I'm still exploring those questions. A couple of them: am I contributing enough to the world through art? Should I just quit art and do all the other things that need to be done? Or does art really matter? I mean, when everything closes down and people on the front lines are literally saving people's lives, does art matter? I ultimately came to yes. It does matter for many reasons, for different reasons, right? But so thinking about that, how are artists relevant and important, and how do we move forward in this new reality? But other things like how can we use the opportunity to make theater and dance and art more accessible? The theaters were closed, yay. Like we were outside, we were in the streets, we were free. The cost wasn't there. And so like the barriers broke down in some sense, and people came together in the only way they could with their bodies outside in Rochester weather. It was pretty amazing. And so how do we continue that? And how do we not go back to normal, right? Like I want to move forward. And I think so many of you have captured this so well. Like, what have we learned as a collective in our bodies? And how are we still unwinding that? You know, how are we still understanding in our bodies what's still going on? So I'm working my way out of it. It's a process. And I think that I have changed as the world has changed. And I hope that, you know, we can make more change as a result of this. I even have trouble making a dance in a theater now, which is really ironic. But I hope that I can find a way to weave it together in the future. So thanks again, Mara. It's been awesome. I wish we knew each other more when you were in Rochester, but I appreciate the asking.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you so much. And I so appreciate the fact that you are a dancer, a choreographer, someone who works with the body, and we see that perspective in your story. So thank you for that. And I see in the chat that Kadija, who is also interested in performance and being in a physical space with other people and changing people through that, she wrote that she was really inspired by your story. So I'm so glad to make that connection. Finally, we have the brilliant Ian Layton, whose story is called Rupture and Repair. And I just want to say, so after Ian, we're going to have some Q&A. So if you have questions for each other, or the audience has any questions for all of these amazing storytellers, you can put those questions in the chat. But Ian, your story.
Hello, can everyone hear me? All right. Hi, my name's Ian. I'm a Jewish anarchist working in mental health care in Rochester, New York. So thinking back on 2020, I describe it kind of like a whirlwind. I started a new position at an outpatient mental health program right before the pandemic, and then was pulled out of that space and sent home and had to facilitate groups all day, every day, on Zoom, connecting with people I'd never met, you know, learning about them, learning how to support them, which was extremely difficult and continues to be today. I actually started dating my current partner, which was both exciting and difficult for many reasons. And I hosted a young man my age who was released from Buffalo Federal Detention Facility after 2 years of incarceration, originally from Central Africa and Chad. And then later participated in the Daniel Prude uprising, and then moved homes at the end of the year. So I share all that just to kind of reflect on how incredibly stressful and hectic and beautiful 2020 was. And I was so focused on just taking it one day at a time. That was really my mindset from the beginning, just one day at a time. And that helped me get through it. And at the same time, I wasn't really aware of how much stress my body had taken on, how much stress and you know, trauma was in my body, until things kind of slowed down in winter of 2020, 2021. And that's when I was asked to write a piece by Mara, which I'm super grateful for. Immediately, I knew that I wanted to write about my experience with Renee, as I call him in the story, the young man from Chad. He lived at my home for about 6 months, and it ended in such a difficult and painful way, I think, for both of us. And I had no time to process that because it literally ended right as the Daniel Prude uprising began, which I flew myself into. And so this was an opportunity for me to kind of reflect on that experience a little bit. And so at the time that I was writing this, I was reading some pieces by Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. And one piece in particular really stuck out. to me. And he was writing about how the roots of evil, the root of suffering, is really about separation, and how separation creates suffering and evil in the world. And that really resonated with me. And I just kept thinking about that, this idea of separation, but also connection, and kind of these forces constantly present in the world. And I think the pandemic especially shed a light on all the fissures and inequalities and violences in our world, both in the forms of white supremacy, capitalism, and all the isms that are, wrapped up in that. And so in getting to know Renee and our time together, I understood that the depth of separation and violence that he had been experiencing. And over the course of 4 years, really, not just in Chad, but also in the United States, being detained, in a cage for so long. So I think my experience with him, as well as this piece and the pandemic, really brought home my own kind of belief that, separation and division really are at the root of suffering. So my first draft was really focused on the separation and the pain that I was processing now that things had slowed down, processing the distance between Renee and myself, the life experiences, as well as our own conflict. And then, our real distance and not really having a relationship anymore. Mara gave me some really helpful feedback, and she kind of helped me focus more on what actually connected us, our bond, our time together, the things that we shared in common, our shared values, experiences together, especially right after George Floyd, as well as kind of just my gratitude for knowing him, being a part of his journey. And it also helped me think about my own family. My Oma, who lived in Australia, she passed away right before the pandemic, and I had been hoping to visit and talk to her more and learn about her life. And I know that she had been dislocated from Germany, escaping, the Nazi rule. And when she finally landed in Australia years later, she brought immigrants and refugees together quite often to share space and community. So in reflecting on Renee and his separation from his family, it also brought me to my own separation from my now ancestors. So I think the experience of writing this was really healing for me. It healed that pain I felt about our relationship and the grief I felt for that loss between myself and Renee. And just an update on him, he won his asylum case. He has his own place, and I just learned this very recently, and that also kind of like brings a great amount of joy to me. So yeah, that's all I have to share today. Thank you so much, Mara, and everyone, for sharing your stories. It's really beautiful to listen to.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for your very beautiful, poetic story that talks about the personal, but then also the collective and the universal. It's really very beautifully done. Thank you. So with that, I think we're going to open it up for questions. If you can ask a question in the chat, and I already see one. Blue, do you want to do this, or do you want me to do it? I see a question from Deema already in the chat.
Go ahead, Mara.
All right, so I'll just read that out. I have a lot of questions as well, and if you have other questions, please feel free to share them, and I can read them. Darien, so this is from Deema. The question is for Darien. I was struck by your reflections on struggle and reimagining our ancestors' role in our lives, especially the idea of them standing shoulder to shoulder with us. How does that idea change the struggle for you personally?
Thanks for that question, Deema. I think it just allows me to feel their presence and their strength, and I guess where that comes from for me, and I kind of perceive this as maybe a peculiarity of kind of white bourgeois values or morality or ideology, that, you know, there's this sense that, oh, what the ancestors went through, that was crazy stuff, right? I mean, it's no longer with us, but it's very much with us. And I think, you know, I think trying to puncture some of that papering over, right, the cover story. And certainly I'm glad that my great grandma Lucy had a cover story to protect her to a certain extent in the 1920s as a single woman with 3 children. Yeah, I think the idea, it just came from this urge to want to kind of break with this idea that the past is really past, you know. And I think that this is the last thing I'll kind of say on this. I didn't tell my parents, both of whom are still alive, that I wrote this piece, or that I was kind of airing family dirty laundry a little bit, maybe, in public. They found it somehow Googling something, much to my terror, and they both really loved it, and it really resonated with them. And so, you know, I think just kind of speaking back to this idea that we hold about the past's proper place in our lives as people who, you know, want to climb up out of the struggle, and then just kind of be there sitting back, enjoying, you know. I think, again, the point is to be in it. Liberation is not guaranteed, only the struggle is. So anyway, thanks for that question, Deema.
Beautiful, thank you.
I actually have a question for Ashwaq. Ashwaq, are you still there? I'm not seeing Ashwaq. I don't know, maybe she's not there. I have another one for Kadija. Kadija, I just wanted to ask you about your students, how they're doing right now, and have you been able to get back to some of the workshops that you do with them?
Thank you very much for that question. Unfortunately, when the COVID hit, work wasn't going well, school was closed, and I wasn't working, and life was really hard for me. And I had the opportunity to, I got a job from Guinea-Conakry, West Africa. I got a job to teach there. So for the past 1 year and a half, I am in Guinea-Conakry, in Guinea working. But hopefully soon I will return back home to Gambia and continue my work. Yeah, but school has resumed and the kids are going to school, but not attending my program. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kadija, for that update. I also have a question for Zoe. Zoe, activism is such a big part of your life. And I know that with COVID, it was difficult to be in the same space with other people. So obviously activism changed, it transformed. And I was just wondering what's going on right now in Ireland.
Oh yeah, well, we're back on the streets, which is great.
Yeah.
And also like putting on live events and that kind of thing. So it's great because it was, you know, like hashtags and photos and selfies, and even we do vigils for Palestine for New Year's Eve every year, but it was like individuals going along to like, you know, places of note, say in Ireland, with flags and stuff to like show our solidarity with Palestine. So it's great now we can gather again together. And for example, in Dublin last weekend, we had a protest against the current Israeli onslaught in Palestine. So yeah, we're definitely back on the streets. There was also there was a horrendous double homophobic murder of 2 men here in Ireland here last week. So there were vigils all over the country and people came together for that kind of thing. So I actually think, just like as someone who's kind of always on the street, more people are on the street, maybe because they couldn't be, and it made them think about wanting to be, you know, active, more active and more visible, and hadn't been before, that are now. So I think that's a good thing.
That's really good. Thank you, Zoe. I also have a question for Erica. I'm sorry, I have so many questions. If other people have questions, please share them. I know Rose has a question. I will address that. But I wanted to ask Erica something. So going back to your beautiful artwork, Celebrate With Me, you made a strong political statement through that piece. You are also a journalist, so you also know the power of words. And I was just wondering what you think of using visual art versus words.
Oh, that's an interesting question for me, because I initially had tried to use visual art as an escape from my journalism life and my life writing about mass incarceration. My job is that I'm the writing director for the Vera Institute of Justice, and we document and criticize atrocities in mass incarceration and also in immigration detention. And so to me, visual arts had been a way to sort of not deal with that, or an escape. But you can't, I guess you can't escape it. And so I would say that for me, it came out in this piece because I couldn't do the past. I wanted to just do sort of like a collage of the past with my grandfather and hang it up in my house. But then it was almost kind of like what Darien was saying. It was like the future or the present was there, and I couldn't escape it. And even maybe despite myself, it came into the visual arts. And I think, I do think a picture is worth 1,000 words to a certain extent, and like visuals hit you in a way that words don't, or maybe not necessarily in a better way, but just in a different way. So I think it's important to sort of have things going on all fronts.
Thank you. Thanks, Erica. And I also have a question for Quajay. You talk about how rather than the birds and the bees talk, you describe this other talk that people of color have to give their kids. And I was just wondering how, when people heard your story, maybe that was something new for them, and how they reacted to that.
Yeah, a lot of people that I've had that conversation with have reacted in a, what's the conversation? They may not have had the conversation themselves, or they want to understand what the conversation is. And for folks that are not aware of what the conversation is, it's you're very respectful. You say yes, sir, no, sir. When you're speaking to a police officer or someone in power, your hands are visible. You tell the officer everything that you're going to do. I'm going to now reach into my glove box to get the registration that you've asked me for, making sure to make eye contact, no sudden movements, making sure not to have anything in your hands that may be perceived or conceived as something else. So those are the things that we talked about. And when I have those conversations with folks, they're very taken aback, like, oh, I would have never thought that you would have to have a conversation on how to act with a police officer or someone in power. And it's really that, very respectful, and I think most folks are respectful in general, but there's no questions asked. You do what you're told, you don't question what's happening, because it can go very differently within a matter of seconds.
Thank you, Quajay. Thank you for that. And then I also have a question for Karen. Karen, I was just wondering, you created an art object as a reaction to the stories that you read in the archive. And I was just wondering if, because it's an object, it can be shown in a gallery, whether it's been shown in different exhibitions, in different spaces, and how people have reacted to it.
It was shown at RIT, Rochester Institute of Technology, in a group show for Arena. And I think that's the only place that it has been shown up to now. Generally speaking, the younger people have reacted with more enthusiasm and more acceptance to the idea than older people, or have shown more interest. I've had people take photos of it and for their children, for their university age children, and sending it off to different places like that.
Thank you, Karen. I just see here, there's a comment from Rose saying, I can't help but hear the choreography and use of the body in Quajay's detail of the talk. And then Paul has a question that anyone can address, I guess. He says, so much of the tapestry is unseen and meant to be hidden so that its beauty can be showcased. How does this fact speak to solidarity? So if anyone wants to answer that. And then I know that there was a question for me from Rose. She says, I would love to hear a bit of reflection from Mara. How do you feel about the project in the aftermath? Do you imagine other iterations of it? Does the reflection continue, or is it a moment in time? For me, what I hope for is that the Warp and Weft is an ongoing project and that it's constantly evolving. And that this whole idea of creating an archive of stories by us, for us, continues. So I'm constantly asking people to let me know if they want to share a story or if they want to share their reaction to a story that they've listened to in the archive. And I would love to include that and, you know, just keep growing this project. So that's my hope. Definitely
Mara,
not in time.
Mara, can I jump in there? I have a follow-up question for you. And this is something, you know, we've talked about many details of the project over the last couple of years, but I'm wondering, yeah, for the next level for you, have you thought about, you know, pursuing funding or growing this into an independent organization or a nonprofit or, you know, something of that nature? And, you know, I'm around many different artist projects that get their start with an individual, you know, artist's short-term initiative that might involve a few other artists, but really can snowball into an offshoot, into an organization, into a whole side career sometimes. So I wonder, you know, how far you could take this. So you have the capacity or the interest to take this.
I would love to do that, but I have to be very honest. I'm not good with grants or not good with getting any kind of money. Really, that's like my biggest flaw. So yeah, if people have any ideas, share with me. I would love to grow the project, as you said, and for it to, you know, if we obviously if we have some funding, then we can do things with it that we wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So yeah, we should talk.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I am looking at the chat. Blue, do you have any questions, or anyone else? Any of the other storytellers?
I only want to add a little texture as a comment here, and as someone who, you know, in my intro there, I mentioned briefly that I'm now living with the exhibition, and that goes for all of us in the gallery here. And I just want to speak again from our perspective. When we show a project like this, we visit the exhibition passively all day long. You know, yesterday we were here, I was here for, I don't know, from 9 a.m. to almost 8 p.m. or maybe later. Some days we're here for 12 hours. We, especially an exhibition like this that has multimedia elements and an audio loop, which in this case it's a 4-hour loop, so it doesn't get especially redundant. But it's really an incredible exhibition for us to live with, because it really feels like we're kind of passively absorbing each of your stories in happenstance. We may walk through the gallery to meet someone and we encounter some part of Zoe's story. Or occasionally I have found myself hearing bits of Quajay's story. Just coincidentally, I happened to pass through the gallery at the same time to hear the same bit of Quajay's story. So for us who work in the industry, this is a particularly, I think, personal experience with all of you and your stories. We hear them in unique and surprising ways, and your stories kind of seep into our life, I think. So just on behalf of everybody else who works here at the space, at Rocco, I want to thank you for sharing them with us, and know that we're living with your voice for at least 6 or 7 hours every day. So it's really wonderful. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Blue. So with that, since we don't have any other questions, I'll wrap it up and just remind everyone once again that this is an ongoing project. So if you want to share your story, please let me know. Thank you, Blue, Rocco, everyone, for creating community together this evening. Let's continue to share our stories with one another. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Amazing event. Thank you so much.
Thank you.